It's all right. Job was taking dominion. Praise God. I want to welcome you all this morning to Bible study. Good to see you here. We are continuing our series called Kingdom Prosperity and talking about the issue of prosperity. As we've mentioned before, the dictionary definition of the word is a thriving or a growing condition, especially as it concerns finances. So the last two lessons we talked about wrong or hurtful financial decisions. Of course, one of these bad or harmful financial decisions is failing to plan your finances in advance. If you don't have a plan, it's going to be very difficult to prosper. In finances, a plan is called a budget. We talk about financial planning, we're talking about budgeting. And the Bible makes it clear that budgeting it's not just a math question. Budgeting is holy. There is a righteous component to having a wise budget. I want to talk about holy budgeting this morning. Go ahead and read our text, 3 John, verse 2.
Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers.
Okay, this is our foundational scripture. This is what we're using to organize our series of lessons. First, let's talk about planning to fail. Your financial future, in a large way, is going to be determined by decisions made beforehand. Literally, decisions made in advance. And so, we talk about a plan. A plan is organized decisions made beforehand based on the end result that we want or that we need. Luke 14:28.
Suppose one of you wants to build a tower, will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it?
Now, this is a practical financial lesson. This is actually a budgeting scripture. Think about this. I know most of us, we're not going to be building a tower, but he's talking about something that costs money. So if you're going to do something that costs money, wouldn't you first sit down and see if you have enough money to do it? Right? In other words, I would like to buy this, or I would like to live here, or I would like to go there. Okay, that's your goal. So now how do you get there? How much money is it going to take? Do I currently have enough money to have it? If not, how can I get enough money to do what I want or what I need to do? And how long is it going to take? This is the elemental issue of a budget. If you want something, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with wanting something. And it's okay to want something that you can't afford. That's not evil, right? There's been many times I've thought about something, I would like to have that, I can't afford it. Okay, well, how could I afford it? And that's where a budget comes in. Now we're going to make a plan for it. And so planning then involves, and this is that difficult word, thinking. See, our computer guy's getting ahead of me. He's jumping it, right? We don't like to talk about thinking, right? But you cannot succeed financially unless you think. You must be willing to engage your mind when we talk about finances. Go ahead and read Luke 14, verse 31.
If a king is going to fight another king, first he will sit down and plan. He will decide if he and his 10,000 soldiers can defeat the other king who has 20,000 soldiers.
Okay, this is the same text. We just read verse 28. If you want to build a tower, you plan how much it's going to cost. This is just a further illustration. Now he's actually enlarging the concept of thinking and planning. In war, it's not just about if you have enough, but now it's about strategy. And so he's saying in finances, there's going to have to be a plan. You're going to have to involve strategy and thinking. right? A lot of budgeting is thinking about what's coming toward you. And this is where a lot of people, they lose it. They're not thinking about it, right? They're thinking about, what do I need today, right? How much money do I need to buy lunch today? And that's as far ahead as you're thinking, and that's why your budget doesn't work. You have to think about what's coming. So let's just brainstorm for a minute, right? Most of us are going to have a rent payment, or if you have a home loan or bond, you've got a bond payment. That's coming, isn't it? Right? Fuel payments are coming. If you own a car, you're going to have to put fuel or petrol in it, but also maintenance is coming, isn't it? Right? You're going to have to plan. In every, whatever your interval is, every 6,000 kilometers, I'm going to have to change the oil. How much does that cost? I have to plan for that. You have to always think about what's coming. If you're single and you would like to be married one day, you're going to have to think about that. One day my expenses are going to change, right? If your wife says, guess what, sweetie, I'm pregnant, your expenses are about to change, right? The food expenses, you will not believe what it costs for diapers and butt wipes. I mean, seriously, it's like you can either keep your kids' nappies changed, right? Or you could, start a business. I mean, it's astounding. But you have to plan for these things. So there are it's not just what your expenses are today, but there are expenses coming. That's what the scripture is saying. He's saying, if you were like a king going to war, you would plan for this. You would think about it carefully. So, the biggest mistake that people make in finances is lack of planning. This is where most people break down. They just simply don't plan for anything. Most people, most of us, we are responders rather than planners. We respond financially. We do not plan financially. We'll respond to advertising. You see something, think, man, I really want that. That really looks nice. I would like that. We respond to family and friends. They've got this. They're doing this. Now, you know what? I want to do that as well. We respond to our emotions. We respond to all kinds of things, but we're not planning, right? You see men and women both do this, but in different ways, right? Women will spend responsively, right? Whether it's, their shoes or clothes or hair. This is South Africa, right? You suddenly see someone else and you're jealous. I want to buy hair like hers, right? You're just responding, right? Revival's coming. Now, I've said this before. When I first moved here, I was shocked. It was just before conference, right? And then suddenly conference, and there was all these new women in church. I have no idea who were all. They're all the same. They just went and bought new hair. The men do the same thing. Might be electronics or sports equipment or toys, whatever it is. But the point is, if in your finances you are a responder rather than a planner, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to end up spending money that you don't have, or you're going to spend money that you can't afford to spend. Very practical in life is you shouldn't spend more than you earn, right? Now, for much of human history, that was normal. It was impossible. You couldn't spend more than you earn. But now it's very easy to spend more than you earn. You can get credit cards. You can get quick loans. You can get payday advances. You can get there's all kinds of ways to go into debt. We talked about that in a previous lesson. But if you want to get ahead in life, all of your spending must be determined by your income. That is a crucial truth. You have to determine your spending based on your income. We're going to get to the practicals of that in a few minutes. My grandfather used to always say, if your outgo exceeds your income, then your upkeep will be your downfall. And that's a truth about life. They ought to teach that in school. You know what they ought to do in your final year of high school? They ought to cut out, geometry or whatever they're teaching, right? You know what? No one needs to know pi r squared, right? I know how to find the area of a circle, and I have never once, ever in my entire life needed that information. But if they would have taught me about debt or taxes or saving, sorry, that's my little, if there's any politicians watching, listen to me. You want to save the country, teach practical finances in school. But the Bible is clear on this. The lack of wisdom and planning are always connected to poverty and financial lack. Proverbs 6, verses 6 to 11.
Go watch the ants, you lazy person. Watch what they do and be wise. Ants have no commander, no leader or ruler, but they store up food in the summer and gather their supplies at the harvest. How long will you lie there, you lazy person? When will you get up from sleeping? You sleep a little, you take a nap, you fold your hands and lie down to rest. So will you be as poor as if you had been robbed. You will have a little as if you had been held.
So here the Bible is using the ants as a symbol of wisdom, but look at what their wisdom really is. It's planning in advance, isn't it? It says they store up food in the summer. Planning is the essence of financial wisdom. You can read all kinds of financial books. That's good. I think that's wise. You need to get wisdom, get understanding. But the greatest wisdom is simply this. It's planning. If you will plan, that is the demonstration of financial wisdom. And the scripture says poverty comes as the result of not planning in advance. Listen, if you don't have a financial plan, let's be real, you're actually planning to fail. You are planning for failure. That's what you're preparing for. If you don't have a savings plan or a spending plan or a giving plan, if you don't have a plan of how to get ahead, if you haven't really worked this out, then you actually are making a plan to fail. Now, planning is important to God, and that's what we need to understand here. God is a planner. You see all throughout Revelation that God was planning things. God continued to make wise plans, set things in order. So this is something that God appreciates, and so we need to reflect that. God planned the universe, which operates by plans or laws, right? God designed sowing and reaping. That was God's wisdom. So if we want favor, then we also are going to have to use wisdom and plan in our finances. I want to just stop right there and see if I've triggered anything. We're gonna move on. We are going to talk about practical budgeting, but if I've triggered any questions so far before we move on. Talking about failing to plan. Okay, Far Pumani over there.
Pastor, you mentioned people will respond to a situation, whether it's whatever you want to buy. Does that include if you save money for like emergency cases? Is that incorrect?
No, because that's a plan, right? They're planning ahead. Most people, their financial decisions are based only on response, not on a plan. If I had an emergency right now financially, I've already planned for it. I have money that I can spend on that. That was the point of my planning. Yeah, very good. What else? Any other questions before we move on? Okay, we'll move on. Let's talk just for a moment about having a plan. A financial plan is called a budget, or literally a spending plan. This is a written plan for your money. A budget is designed to allocate or to control the flow of our money. We have a predetermined amount of finances, every one of us. A budget, it means that one portion is set aside for each need or each opportunity for specific purposes, right? The oldest systems were the jars or the envelope systems. How many of you have heard of the envelope budget system? Okay, 2. All right, I'll explain it to you. This is the first one I ever learned. And that was, they said, when you get paid, you get all of your paycheck in cash, you cash your check or withdraw it from the bank, and then you have a little box with envelopes in it. And so, for example, one envelope has my rent or my housing, and I'll write on the envelope how much needs to be in there. If it's, 1,000, you write that. And then each week when you get paid, I need to put this much in each envelope. And then you have an envelope for groceries. You have an envelope for the light bill, etc. And so you divide your money into each envelope. And so then when it's time to pay the light bill, you grab the light bill envelope and you pay the light bill. You don't grab the food envelope and pay the light bill, right? Because that doesn't make sense. So, but that gives you a visual picture of what a budget is. If you make 10,000 Rand in a given period, maybe that's a month or whatever the period is, you make up your mind, this much goes here. 2,000 goes to this. 1,000 goes to this. That's the visual picture of what a budget is. We are allocating, or we are determining where our money is going to go, but we're determining it in advance. Another way of stating this, a budget is telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went, which is what a lot of us do, isn't it? Right? You ever, the old saying, I've got too much month at the end of my paycheck? Does that ever happen to you? It's okay, you can be honest in church. In fact, if there's anywhere to be honest, it's in church, right? Right? That's life. But that's how most of us live our life. We go, oh man, what happened, right? It's funny. Have you noticed how difficult it is to get a hold of people from about like the 25th of the month on? Because they've all run out of airtime and data. You can't get a hold of them. They didn't have an airtime budget, but they should. That's just wisdom. You should be able to determine these things. So that's the point. A budget tells your money where to go. It's not wondering where your money went. You're determining this in advance, what your money is going to do. So, we're going to get to this in a moment. We'll get to the practical things. But the principle here with a budget is we decide in advance to allocate our money to the places that we need it to go, or that we've decided that it must go. Or another way, saying, we're getting ahead of me, Lavandra. You got to wait. So you guys can just read it. I'll save my voice. But budgeting is biblical. God will bless it supernaturally. Genesis 41, verses 33 to 36.
So let the king choose a man who is very wise and understanding, and set him over the land of Egypt. And let the king also appoint officers over the land, who should take 1/5 of all the food that is grown during the 7 good years. They should gather all the food that is produced during the good years that are coming, and under the king's authority they should store the grain in the cities and guard it. That food should be safe to use during the 7 years of hunger that will come on the land of Egypt. Then the people in Egypt will not die during the 7 years of hunger.
Okay, so this is Joseph. I preached from this scripture recently. He's giving wisdom to Pharaoh. But think about this in the context of a budget. He says, I know what's coming. There's going to be these 7 years that are good, 7 years that are bad. I know what's coming, so we're going to make a plan now. We're going to set aside some finances for when we have need. And then what we see is that God helped them, God blessed them, and the nation was saved. Listen, God will bless budgeting. If you will get it, it doesn't have to be super complex. You don't have to overthink it. But if you will make a wise and a rational budget, I can promise you that God will help you. So let's talk about making a budget. Let's make this very practical. We'll talk about making a budget, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion when we're done. A few steps you have to go through to make a budget. Number one, you have to track your expenses for a period of time. I usually recommend, if you're going to track your expenses for 1 month. If you're in financial difficulty, you want to make a budget, I think this is where you need to start. What that means is you need to write down everything you spend for 1 month. And I mean everything. If it's 1 rand, the coffee shop. And it was there was nothing. It was like all the coffee shop. And then I was like, you know what? I should probably set up my coffee machine again because it's way cheaper to make it at home than go to the coffee shop. In other words, looking at my expenses caused me to wake up to the reality of my financial situation. So this is why, if you want to make a budget, I really think you need to start here. You need to track your expenses for a month, right? Then you can see areas that are wasteful. You can see areas that are unnecessary. You might look at and you'll realize, wait a minute, I'm spending too much on this. I shouldn't be spending that. Many people find that simply the act of tracking their expenses is enough to solve their financial problems. It's like if you're trying to lose weight and counting calories. Have you ever tried to count calories? Right? Well, one time we tried that. We got an app, right? And so everything, if you're at McDonald's, you could scan the thing, and then at the end of the day, it would give you the report. And it's like, if you want to keep eating like this, you're going to have to run 74 miles a day. And then you realize, you know what? It's not worth it. Just counting it was enough. It put me off a lot of things and probably saved my life, right? Tracking your finances can have a very similar effect. If you just honestly tracked what you spent your money on for a period of time, it would probably solve a lot of problems right there. Proverbs 24, verse 3.
Through wisdom on a house built, and by understanding it is established.
Through wisdom, a house is built. And through understanding, it's established. So, this is step 1. Track your expenses for a month. Then step 2 is we need to determine our income. For many people, that's very simple. I know a lot of people, you are paid monthly. That's simple. If you have a monthly salary, you know your income, right? For others, it may not be the same, right? It may not be the same amount every week if you're paid weekly, or it may fluctuate based on the hours that you work. Sometimes it's overtime. You have different expenses. But the key is averaging. If you want to really get a handle on your finances, to determine your income, you need to average things. For example, if you were paid weekly, if you're paid 1,000 Rand a week, right, and that's always it, what's your average weekly income? 1,000 Rand. It was easy. See how I did that? Didn't even need math, right? But what if it fluctuates, right? Your salary might fluctuate each week. It could go from 900 to 1,100, right? If it's fluctuating, the point is you add it all up and then divide by 4. So for example, if you're paid weekly, add up 4 weeks' salary and divide it by 4, you get your average, even if it fluctuates, right? The average is important because that's your baseline. If you make, for example, 900 Rand one week and 1,100 the next week, et cetera, you need to find out what the average is so that you know your baseline. Because that's how you're going to build your budget, is on the average. If you're paid monthly and it's always the same, great, that's easy. If not, if your salary fluctuates, then add up the last 1 year of salary and divide by 12. This is not complicated math, right? This is simple stuff. But it's important that you get this. You need to know your average income, because I've sat with people to make a budget, and I say, well, how much do you make? And they'll say, well, I make this much a month. Okay, really? Man, you should have no financial problems. Well, yeah, but last month I made less. Okay, we need to know the average. Come on, right? And so if you want to make a budget, you need to know your average income, whether that's weekly or monthly. You've got to work that out. Of course, if you are if you're self-employed or you are a subcontractor, then your income is after expenses, right? And then very practical, if you're going to determine your income, to figure out all of your income, not just what you're paid at your job. If you are getting a subsidy or whatever, calculate all of your income so that you know what it is. So that's step 2. Step 1, write down all of your expenses for a month so you know where you're at. Step 2, determine your income. And then step 3, now we need to work on our practical expenses, determining your expenses. You are going to take these 2 pieces of information. First, all the money that you spent for a month. Second, what is your average income for a month? And using those 2 numbers, now we're going to start doing the hard work. When you look at your expenses, first you need to know the interval of the expense. For example, is this a bill that you pay once per week? Is it a bill that you pay once every month, every 3 months? Right? I just got an email yesterday that my life insurance policy, they're going to deduct it this weekend. That's a very simple one for me because it's a once a month bill. I am also paid once a month. So that's really easy. I don't even have to do math to figure this one out. It's automatic, right? But if you have a bill that say you pay every 3 months, right? Pastor Walid in Ethiopia, he has to pay his rent every 3 months, right? Right? So if you have a bill like that, now you're going to have to do math. If I make this much per month, but I have this bill that's due every 3 months, right? What do? You divide by 3, and that's how much you have to set aside each month for that bill. Are you with me so far? Right? I know none of this is complicated, but I also know, after having been a pastor for a long time, that most people don't do this. They just simply refuse to make a budget, and then they wonder why it's always crisis. If, for example, your rent payment or the bond on your home was 7,000 Rand per month, right? You're going to have to set aside 1,750 per week in order to be able to pay that bill at the end of the month, right? Now, if you're a math genius here, or if you've ever looked at a calendar ever in your life, you probably know that there's not actually 4 weeks in a month. How many of you have figured that out so far? Right? Unless it's February and it's a leap year. That's the only time there's ever, or it's not a leap year, whichever way it is. It was one of those, right? This is why you can tell I didn't matriculate. I can't even tell how many days are in a month. But see, if you will base your budget on a 4-week calendar, you're going to love yourself in about 3 months, because every 3 months you're going to discover you're 1 week ahead. Because there's actually approximately 4.3 weeks in every month. But if you pay 7,000 Rand a month and you save 1,750 a week, you're going to discover right around 3 months, actually 1 week into the 4th month, you're going to discover you have 1,750 Rand extra sitting around. And so you'll be very happy at the end of that time. But the point is, for any bill, if it's bigger, if it's larger than your 1 week's salary, you're going to set aside a portion from each salary. Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to determine which expenses are non-negotiable. How many of you know some bills you can't negotiate? Right? Have you ever tried to negotiate with the city of Johannesburg? Right? And tell them, you know what, this month I'd like to pay a little bit less for water. Have you ever tried that? It doesn't work. I've actually tried that, in case you're wondering. When I showed up here, there was some unresolved business to be taken care of, and so we negotiated. We even got lawyers involved, and nothing happened. There are some bills that are non-negotiable, right? Probably your house payment, whether it's rent or a bond. That's just what it is. You can't change that. Probably, your electricity bill. There's certain bill you can't. Your tithe, that is non-negotiable. There are certain expenses in life that are never going to change. You can't change them. You simply can't. If, for example, if you require a phone for your job, that's a non-negotiable. You have to pay for airtime. You can't just opt not to. So there are certain non-negotiable expenses. In your budget, those are going to come in a much higher priority. There are, however, other expenses that are negotiable, or they can be adjusted, right? When you're going to eat, are you going to have steak? Or are you going to have mince? Or are you going to have beans? You can have pop. You can negotiate that one, can't you? Suddenly now you discover there's a lot of wiggle room. If you decide, well, this month is my anniversary, we're going to go out to eat, wonderful. I think you should do that, but that also is a negotiable expense. You need to look at your budget and let your budget tell you which restaurant you should go out to. Hello? Right? The budget, right? He's the traffic cop. Well, you say, listen, Mr. Budget, this is what I would like to do. We want to go and, we really feel like Nando's tonight, right? And Mr. Budget says, hold it. I think tonight you're going to Chicken Licken. Because I've checked and I don't have Nando's cash. So that's the point of a budget. It keeps you out of trouble. So there are expenses that are negotiable. Now, the problem with negotiable expenses is that we don't want them to be negotiable, do we? But Pastor Heimberg, every month I get new braids. Okay, maybe it should be every 2 months. I mean, let's just be practical, right? No, Pastor Heimberg, Jonathan D came out with a new color, right? And my little baby, right? He's 27, right? But my little baby, he's got to have them. Okay, maybe he doesn't. You know, there's that other brand that looks just like them, right? And they're only like $4.50. These are negotiable expenses. These are where we learn how tough we are, whether or not we can make these kinds of decisions, whether or not we're willing to be disciplined. And so, as we are determining expenses, we can learn which things need to be cut, which things we need to eliminate, right? Which things can be adjusted. Yes, it's nice to have internet at home, but man, it's free at McDonald's. Right? So the point is there's a lot of expenses in life that we treat as non-negotiable, but they actually are negotiable. We can eliminate them. We can limit them. Then, of course, here's the very practical. One is we add up our expenses and we subtract that from our income. If you have surplus, that's wonderful. You can save it. You can invest it. You could give it away to someone in need. That's a wonderful place to be. But if you discover that your expenses are larger than your income, then you're in trouble and something has to change. Something has to change. A lot of people, it's fascinating to me. I've sat with many people over the years to make budgets. Pastor, I need help. Okay, let's sit down. Let's make a budget. We work through all these things. We get to right here. We say, look, you're spending too much money. Now we have to change something. And they just go, no, I can't. But you can't afford to live like this. Yeah, but I can't change. Listen, there's no way I'm getting rid of that. No way I'm changing this. No way I'll adjust that. What do you expect to happen? Are you expecting just magic? Somehow magically, I can wave my fingers and your budget's just going to grow? It's not going to work that way. You have to limit things. And so here comes the ugly possibility, which none of us like, and that is downsizing. Sometimes in life, you need to downgrade and downsize life. And I know we hate that. But if you want to get ahead, a lot of times the way to get ahead is by downsizing. Maybe you don't need to live in that manner. Maybe you don't need all of the things you think you need. Maybe you can limit some expenses. You can cut some things out, be more creative on the side. But the point is you can get rid of unnecessary things and you can get cheaper things. Listen, there's always a cheaper car to drive. There's always a cheaper house to live in. And as unpleasant as that can be, trust me, I know from experience, sometimes that's the way to get ahead, is to say, no, I know I could justify and say, but I deserve, but I'm going to choose to live smaller so that I can save some money and actually get ahead in real life. When you're making a budget, you have to remember scheduled disasters. Pumani asked the question, essentially about this, but a budget has to include a line item for things that you aren't going to be paying every month. For example, maintenance, unplanned breakages. Right? I mentioned we have a home in the United States that we rent to someone else. That's wonderful. They live there and they pay for the mortgage payment. But I also know something else. I know that things break. Right? The water heater might break. The roof might start leaking. I don't know when. I have no way of figuring that out. So the only way I can live wisely is that I have something set aside to repair those things just in case it happens. If you own a vehicle or you live in a home that you own or you're making payments on, you need to plan for those things. You must have that in your budget. It shouldn't just be rent, tithe, food, clothing. There needs to be emergencies. There needs to be a certain percentage of your income that's going toward scheduled disasters. And then, in my opinion, I think that there is no budget is complete unless it includes savings. If you have no savings, right, of course, if an emergency arises, then you're in immediate trouble. But the real problem is you can't get ahead. So I've taught often on this. I've had people ask me, how much money should I save? The real answer is as much as you can. But it really doesn't matter how small it is. If your budget is extremely tight, and it's like literally you are what you make, that's the amount of your bills. I would challenge you. In fact, I'd be almost willing to bet, except Christians don't bet, that if you worked hard, you could find 1% in your budget of wiggle room. I bet. Right? You know what? 1% in a budget is like 2 times ordering tap water instead of bottled water. Right? I mean, that's one of the safest things you can do in Johannesburg is drink the water, right? That's a small amount. But if you don't save anything, you need to start there. You need to start, even if it's 1%. My personal opinion is that you ought to be saving really at least 10%. But if you can't, that's fine. Start with 1. But the point of savings is it's a one-way street. Money only goes into your savings account. It doesn't come out. We don't say, hey, you know what? I was going to go out with the guys, but I don't have any money. I'll take some money out of savings. No, it stays there, right? It's something that is unreachable to you. There's many different ways of doing this. I actually personally recommend, if you're going to save wisely, we're going to talk about this in depth in a later lesson, the best way to save money is it needs to be in a different bank than the bank you normally use. A different bank account with no card attached to it, totally separate. In other words, it's hard to get access to. Years ago, we set up an account like this. We set up a savings account that's a third-party bank that doesn't even have like branches. It's just online only. It's really hard to get your money out. And that's really good because that means the money only goes in. And we save a small amount every week. Every time we get paid, a little bit goes in there. And it's been that way for years. You must put savings in your budget. But what we see is that God blesses planning or budgeting. Proverbs 10, verse 4.
Lazy hands make a man poor, but diligent hands bring wealth.
Laziness is what we're fighting against. We want to be diligent people, right? So a budget helps you see things more clearly and objectively. It helps you examine and clarify your priorities. It gives you a basis for discussion and agreement. If you're married, a budget's going to help you talk about money because it'll be like this. Honey, I would like to do this. Okay, great. Is it in the budget? No. Well, wonderful. Then we don't even have to talk about it. Right? We don't have to have a fight about it every time. But I want, and you don't care, and you don't love me, you don't respect me. No. The budget said, it's all, we don't even have to have those arguments, and it's a great way to build discipline in your life. All right, so I just want to give you a couple of app recommendations. There are thousands These are not the holy apps, right? But I'm just going to give you a couple of recommendations. If you want to get into budgeting and you're looking for an app to do it, a few I'd recommend. One is called Mint. There's a very helpful budgeting app. There's another one called, it's up on the screen. There you go. YNAB, You Need a Budget. Man, whoever wrote this one, they were thinking it through. And then Every Dollar, this is Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey, if you're not familiar, he is a Christian writer. He writes much and talks often on financial issues, has much to say. And then there's a website, I don't know if I put it in the notes, Gateway People, okay, good, there it is. A lot of resources there. There are budget spreadsheets, some downloadable documents you can fill out. You can fill it out with your wife or your husband or by yourself. There are some things that will help you, just some practical things there. All right, we've got a couple of minutes. I know this is not a deeply spiritual lesson, but talking about budgeting, I want to open for questions or comments this morning, talking about budgeting. If you've got a question or a comment, let me see your hand. Anyone at all? Questions, comments about budgeting? Lift your hand so I can see it. Sipo.
Pastor, I wanted to find out in terms of insurance and medical aid. You find people that say you don't need those. Let's say maybe you afford, because maybe you might not get into an accident, or if you're young, you think that you might live, you'll always be fine. So do you put that also maybe when you afford under budget, or
Yes.
How would you do it?
Well, so when you say insurance, are you speaking of medical insurance? Is that what you're talking about? Car insurance. I think car insurance is the law, isn't it? It's not? Okay. I would suggest that you get car insurance. I think that's wise. I mean, for heaven's sake, you live in Johannesburg. Get car insurance. Make sure it includes a theft policy as well. I've got theft policies, hijacking policies. It's very entertaining, actually. Rachel was calling the insurance company. She had it on speakerphone. I'm listening to talking, and the lady just talking to her. And if someone hijacks the car with you in it, or if they smash the windows, if they burn the car, if they steal. I was thinking, I never heard this stuff in America. So I think that's just wise. Think it through. No matter how cheap of a car you buy, it's still a big purchase, right? Something's going to happen. You're going to bump someone. Someone's going to bump you. Something will happen. You've spent a lot of money on it. You are going to keep spending money in petrol and maintenance and all these things. It is very foolish to not carry insurance. I would say that's very unwise. If you want to say you're a wise person, you need to carry insurance on your car. When it comes to medical aid and health insurance, my opinion is similar, but of course it varies, right? There are, of course, government medical schemes, and I believe, I'm not super tuned in to all of the programs here that has something to do with your income level. But certainly as you age, medical insurance and health policies are very wise, right? They're very practical things. You're going to have medical expenses, and the problem with medical things is they're so flipping expensive. It's not like changing the oil in a car, right? And so having an insurance plan that covers that is wise. Then, of course, the older you get, the more common these things are. And then very practical, if you are a worker, if you're the one that earns the income for your family and you become sick and can't work, then that's going to cause problems. So I think it's wise if you can afford it, even if it's just a little bit. So, but that's something you're going to have to work out with your budget. You have to fight that out with the budget boss. Okay, Danielle.
Pastor, what is your view on funeral covers for your extended family? Because when they pass, obviously, if they didn't have something, the kids are looked at, or
Right.
the immediate.
Do you want my honest opinion?
Yes.
She took a breath before she said yes. I think the best funeral policy is a cheap funeral. And I know that goes against, and this is not African culture, this is every culture, right? We don't carry those because I've instructed my kids, when I die, cremate me, and I don't care what happens after that. Have a nice service at the church. You don't even got to buy me flowers, right? Because the amount of money we spend on people that do not exist anymore is absurd. And every church I've ever pastored, and every culture I've dealt with, is people that are in debt to insane funeral expenses. I strongly disagree with that. So that's my real answer. I don't know how it is here, so I can't really speak. I can speak to funeral policies in the U.S. Everyone that I saw was absolute robbery. It was robbery. And so you got people, they're 30 years old, they start their funeral policy. By the time they die, they've paid $100,000 into it, or whatever it is, and the policy pays out $15,000. Right? That's silly. I can't get behind that. I don't know if it's similar here, but I suspect it's probably close. So, there you go. Okay, yes, Tokozo?
Regarding, for us young people, you know how it gets. Maybe for example, people like me who like eating, it's hard to save money when food is flirting with you.
Yes.
So how do you separate yourself from all these peer pressures and all those type of, like you said, responding to adverts or something? How do you separate yourself from those type of things when you know that at the end of the day it's going to be difficult?
I can tell you what I did personally. When I was single and I lived on my own in the Prescott church, that was the dilemma for me. And it wasn't about the food itself, but it was about being with people. Because after church, everyone's like, hey, we're going out. And we'd go, And so I would force myself, when I got paid, I would go buy groceries. I would spend all my food money on groceries for the house first. So that I didn't have any left to spend. And then if it was a particularly strong temptation, I would literally sometimes eat before church, so that afterwards, if people would invite me out, I could go and not eat. And people thought I was crazy, but I would go so I could be with my friends. I would maybe get a Coke or something, but I wouldn't spend all my money on the restaurant. I would let them be poor, but I was going to save my money. So, because I think for most of us, obviously I could be wrong, but I think for most of us, it's not just the eating. It's that we're with people. We want to go. We want to do the things. So there's other ways to do that. Or just eat cheap. So does that help at all? Okay. Very good. We're going to break. Our service begins in 5 minutes.